My name is Monica Hale, and I'm 34 years old. I used to think family love was something you could buy back, with patience, with forgiveness, with just one more transfer to cover just one more emergency. I used to believe if I stayed calm enough, generous enough, useful enough, I could keep everyone together. I didn't understand that in my parents' house, my children were never sitting at the same table. That afternoon started like any other day where I was doing too much and apologizing for it. A product launch meeting ran nearly 2 hours over, and by the time I glanced at the clock, panic crawled up the back of my throat. I called my mom. "Hi, honey," she answered too brightly, like she'd been waiting for the phone to ring. "Everything okay?" "I'm running late," I said, already grabbing my keys. "Can you keep Caleb and Mia until early evening? I'll be there by 7. "Of course," she said. "Don't worry about a thing." It should have relieved me. Instead, it landed wrong, like a door closing softly behind me. Mom didn't usually volunteer for extra time with my twins. She would never say she didn't want to. She'd just become mysteriously tired or suddenly busy. Or she'd claim the kids were a bit much, said with a smile sharp enough to cut. But I ignored the unease. I always did. When I pulled into my parents' driveway on Maple Street just after 7, I heard laughter. Children's laughter. Bright, bouncing, warm. Then I noticed something else. The laughter didn't blend. It came in separate pockets, like two different worlds. One set of voices floated from the dining room. Another, smaller, quieter, came from the back porch. I used my spare key and let myself in quietly, my heels barely making a sound against the tile. The smell hit first. Pot roast, buttery mashed potatoes, green beans with bacon. A real dinner. Then I saw it. My sister Rebecca's kids, Sophia and Liam, sat at the formal dining table like little royalty, plates full, cheeks flushed from warmth and second helpings. Crystal glasses of milk sat beside their forks, like my mother was hosting a holiday meal. Through the glass door behind them on the back porch, my twins were sitting cross-legged in October cold, bundled in their hoodies, sharing peanut butter crackers over an empty paper plate. Caleb's shoulders were hunched like he was trying to disappear. Mia's hands were steady, but her eyes weren't. Her eyes kept flicking toward the table, toward the food, toward the laughter. I didn't move at first. It felt like my body didn't recognize what it was seeing, like my brain was trying to relabel it into something harmless. Rebecca noticed me and smiled without warmth. "Oh," she said, dragging the word out. "Perfect timing." Mom breezed past me with dirty plates, her voice casual, almost cheerful. "Monica, we just finished dinner." My father sat with his newspaper, chewing slowly as if nothing in the room was uneven, as if he couldn't see 2 grandchildren outside, like they were pets waiting for leftovers. I stepped closer to the glass door and slid it open. "Hey, babies," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "How was your day?" "Fine," Caleb said immediately, the careful voice he'd developed, the one that meant, "Don't make it worse." Mia didn't speak. She just shook her head once. "Did you have fun with Sophia and Liam?" I asked, still crouched beside them, still pretending my chest wasn't splitting. "They played inside," Mia whispered. "Grandma said we were too loud." Caleb's eyes stayed on the crackers. "Grandma said there wasn't enough dinner for everyone." I looked past him, through the glass, at the slow cooker on the counter, half full. Enough for 4 more people. My hands went cold. I stood up and opened the screen door wider. "Actually," I said, voice calm in that dangerous way calm gets when it's holding back something huge. "We're going to fix that." "Oh, Monica," Mom snapped too quickly, like a trapdoor slamming. "They're fine. Children don't need full meals every single time they're here." Rebecca lifted her eyebrows and finally looked up from her phone. "Yeah, we don't want to dirty more dishes for no reason. They already ate." "They ate crackers," I said evenly, the words tasting like metal, while their cousins had pot roast. A silence spread across the dining room. Even my father lowered his paper slightly. I didn't wait for permission. I moved to the slow cooker, grabbed plates, and served Caleb and Mia generous portions. Real food, real warmth. Then carried it to the porch like I was bringing medicine. Mia's face lit up, not with excitement, but with relief. That broke me more than any insult could have. As they ate, I forced my voice to sound casual. So, what did everyone do today while I was at work? Watch TV mostly, Caleb said between bites. Sophia chimed in from inside, mouth full. We played Xbox upstairs in Grandpa's game room. That sounds fun, I said, still looking at my twins. Did Caleb and Mia play too? The silence that followed was loud enough to hurt. Liam finally shrugged. The game room is for older kids. He was 9 months older than my twins. Rebecca leaned back, crossing her legs. You know how it is, she said lightly. Different groups, different comfort levels. Different comfort levels. The phrase hit like a coded message, like something practiced. I repeated it slowly. Different comfort levels. Meaning what exactly? Mom jumped in too fast. Different ages, Monica. Different energy levels. But my twins had friends everywhere. School, sports, the neighborhood. The only place they were suddenly too loud or not compatible was here. Rebecca set her phone down, expression sharpening. We're pretty busy the next few weekends anyway. Birthday parties, neighborhood barbecues, stuff like that. The twins love parties, I said, watching her carefully. They'd have a great time. My father cleared his throat, the sound he made before saying something he thought was reasonable. Well, he said, not quite meeting my eyes, some of those events are specific, long-standing neighborhood traditions. I felt my blood shift temperature. Meaning, I said softly, families that look like yours. Mom's cheeks flushed. Monica, it's not like that. It's exactly like that, I said, and my voice didn't shake. Not even when I looked back at Caleb and Mia, 2 7-year-olds listening with that painful stillness kids get when adults are deciding their worth. Come on, babies, I said, reaching for their backpacks. We're leaving. Mom's voice cracked. Don't go angry. We can talk about this. Talk about what? I asked, turning back once. About how you're teaching my children to expect less? About how you're making them sit outside while their cousins eat inside? About how you're telling them they don't belong? Rebecca stood up, defensive. You're acting like we're horrible people because we're being honest about social realities. I'm acting like a mother, I said, my throat tight, whose children are being treated like second-class family in the one place they should be safest. I got the twins into the car and drove home with my jaw clenched so hard it ached. In the rearview mirror, Caleb stared out the window like he was memorizing what it felt like to be unwanted. Mia's eyes were wet but stubborn. After a long stretch of silence, she whispered, Mama, why can't we go to the barbecues? I gripped the steering wheel. Because some people have very small minds, sweetie. Caleb's voice was quiet, too direct for a child. Because we look different from Sophia and Liam? My chest caved in. Yes, I admitted. Because your dad is black and I'm white, and some people still don't know how to be decent about it. Does Dad know Grandma and Grandpa think we're different? Mia asked, tears slipping free. My mouth opened and closed again. Because what do you tell your children when the truth is, yes, and I kept hoping it would get better. When we got home, my boyfriend, Derek Lawson, was in the kitchen making dinner. He took one look at my face and his hands stilled. Rough day? He asked carefully. Caleb didn't even take his shoes off. He walked straight to Derek and said, with the devastating honesty only a child has, Dad, Grandpa says we can't go to neighborhood parties because people aren't comfortable with mixed kids. Derek's spatula froze in midair, and in that tiny pause, I saw something cycle across his face. Hurt, rage, and a painful, familiar resignation. Like a man hearing confirmation of what he suspected for years. He set the spatula down with shaking control. Then he crouched to the twins' eye level and said, voice thick, How does that make you feel? Confused, Caleb said. We didn't do anything wrong. Mad, Mia whispered, fists clenched. You're right, Derek said softly. You didn't do anything wrong. When people treat you badly because of how you look, it tells you something about them, not you. Later, after the twins were asleep, Derek and I sat on the couch with untouched tea. The air between us felt heavy with all the conversations we'd avoided. How long have you known? I asked. Derek's eyes stayed on the dark TV screen, like it was safer than looking at me. A long time, he admitted. I just didn't want to be the reason you lost your family. My throat tightened. You weren't. He exhaled, slow and controlled. Monica, we have to protect our kids. I nodded, and something inside me hardened into shape, like a boundary forming bone. There's something else, I said, reaching for my laptop. I need to see what I've been pretending not to see. I opened my banking app. My fingers shook as I pulled up transfer histories. Month after month, year after year. Derek leaned in, silent. And when the totals started stacking, the room went cold. Not because of numbers. Because the pattern was a confession. And for the first time in my life, I understood. They didn't just treat my children like scraps. They treated me like the hand that delivered them. And I was done being useful. If you'd asked me a year ago to describe my family, I would have used words like tight-knit and traditional. I would have told you my parents were just set in their ways, and my sister Rebecca was going through a lot. I would have smiled like that explanation covered everything. What I wouldn't have told you, what I couldn't admit even to myself, was that my family had been training me for a role my whole life. Not daughter, not sister. That night, after the twins fell asleep, Derek and I sat in the dim living room, the kitchen light spilling out like a harsh spotlight. The laptop stayed open on the coffee table, transfer history glowing back at us like evidence at a trial. I stared at the screen until the numbers stopped looking like money and started looking like time, like birthdays, like weekends we didn't take, like stress we carried home and poured into each other's laps because we didn't know where else to put it. Derek didn't push. He never pushed when it came to my family. That was the problem. He just said quietly, "Talk to me." So I did. Not in a neat summary, not in the version I'd been telling myself for years. I told him the truth, piece by piece, the way it actually happened, innocently at first, always innocently. It started when I was 18, fresh out of high school, barely past the stage where I still felt like a kid playing grown-up. I landed my first real job. Nothing glamorous, just steady hours, a small paycheck that made me feel proud in a way I'd never felt before. Mom called me one evening, voice soft and sweet. "Honey," she said, "now that you're working, do you think you could chip in for groceries sometimes? Just here and there. Things are so expensive." It sounded reasonable. It sounded like adulthood. I sent $20, then $50. And every time I hit send, she praised me like I'd done something holy. "You're such a good daughter, Monica." In my family, being good always meant being useful. The requests didn't come with threats, not then. They came dressed up as tenderness and need. If I hesitated, Mom would sigh like the weight of the world lived on her ribs. "Your father's pride," she'd whisper, like pride was a disease and I was the cure. "He hates asking." Then Dad would get on the phone, clearing his throat, pretending he didn't want to be there. "Your mother worries," he'd say, like he was doing me a favor by explaining her feelings. And I'd send the money. When I got into pharmaceutical sales, when the commission started and my income grew, so did their emergencies. To my parents, my success wasn't something to celebrate. It was a resource to access. Mom needed help with a root canal. "Insurance only covers half, sweetheart." I wired $1,000 the same day. Rebecca's Honda broke down. "She needs it for work," Dad said, voice heavy with disappointment, as if I'd already failed by not offering before he asked. I sent $2,500 for repairs without even calling Rebecca. The furnace died right before winter. They showed me contractor quotes, worried expressions, the careful choreography of two people presenting themselves as desperate but dignified. I paid $6,000, like I was paying penance. Every single time I told myself it was temporary. Every time I told myself, it's family. This is what family does. But the pattern was there even then, quiet, insidious, impossible to see until you stop wanting to be blind. When Derek and I bought our first house, we asked for help painting. Nothing big, just a Saturday afternoon, pizza and music, the kind of thing families do. Everyone had conflicts. Mom had a headache. Dad had errands. Rebecca, already had plans and didn't elaborate. When I had my gallbladder removed and needed someone to watch the twins, Rebecca was suddenly drowning in appointments. Mom offered to come by for an hour, 1 hour, then left because she was exhausted. But when they needed money, my phone rang within minutes of them deciding to ask. It got worse after Derek and I got serious, after we moved in together, after the twins were born, after my life became visible proof that I wasn't living the script my parents would have chosen for me. Derek didn't come from a family that used love as currency. His mother showed up with casseroles. His sisters showed up with babysitting schedules. His friends showed up just because. Mine showed up when there was something to gain. He tried to point it out gently at first. "Babe," he'd say when we were cleaning up after another holiday dinner where Rebecca's kids got gifts twice the size of ours. "When was the last time anyone offered to help us? Not money, just time, support." I always defended them. I was fluent in excuses. Family dynamics are complicated, I'd say. They show love differently. Derek would watch me, expression tight, like he wanted to argue but knew I'd drown in guilt if he did. "Okay," he'd say quietly. But I see now, Derek wasn't just watching my family. He was watching me, watching how I folded myself smaller to fit their expectations, watching how I apologized for needing anything, watching how I smiled after being slighted because a smile meant peace. And peace was my addiction. What I didn't understand was that the financial grooming wasn't separate from the emotional one. It was all the same system. They needed me to be generous. They also needed me to be soft. Because a hard daughter asks questions. A hard daughter keeps receipts. A hard daughter says no. And no was not a word my family allowed me to own. As my career advanced, their emergencies expanded. It was like my paycheck had a pulse they could sense from across town. Every time I got a promotion, Mom would call a week later with a trembling voice. "Sweetheart, something happened." And something always had happened. The refrigerator died. The roof had a leak. The water heater went. Rebecca needed help with school expenses for the kids, even when I knew she wasn't in school and hadn't been in years. "Single moms have it hard," Dad would remind me, as if my motherhood didn't count because I had Derek beside me. But the imbalance wasn't only financial. It was in the way rooms went quiet when Derek walked in. It was in the way my father would make a point to comment on good neighborhoods and then glance at the twins like he was predicting something about them. It was in my mother's questions, always disguised as concern. "Do you ever worry?" she asked once, stirring sugar into her coffee like it mattered more than her words, "about how challenging it might be for the twins to fit in, being, different?" Different. Not biracial, not black, not beautiful, just different, like a stain. Rebecca was worse because she was bolder. She'd say things like, "Kids can be mean," with a little shrug. "You'll have to be realistic." Realistic. That word again, like a hammer. And I kept missing it, kept explaining it away, because I was too busy being the dependable one, the responsible one, the one who paid, the one who made it easier for everyone else to keep pretending. Derek finally broke the silence in the living room, voice low. "Monica," he said, "they've been doing this for years, not just the money." I swallowed hard. "You mean the comments?" He nodded once. "Your mom asked me privately, at Mia's 4th birthday, if I was prepared to provide for you long term, like I was a risk." My stomach twisted. I pictured that day, balloons, cake, Mom laughing too loudly. I'd been so happy. I'd thought it was real. Derek's jaw flexed. "Your dad suggested we wait before having kids to make sure we were compatible." My fingers curled into my palm. "He said that to you?" Derek's eyes were tired. Rebecca asked if I worried our kids would have behavioral issues later. She framed it like she was being thoughtful. Each sentence felt like another brick dropping onto my chest. I whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" Derek reached for my hand, squeezing gently. "Because I know you. You would have tried to fix it. You would have bled yourself dry to keep everyone comfortable." My throat tightened. And you didn't want me to choose. He nodded. I didn't want our love to become a war. The laptop screen still glowed. Transfers, amounts, dates, years. And suddenly, the porch scene wasn't a shocking exception. It was just the first time I'd seen the system clearly. Rebecca's kids first. Mine waiting for scraps. And me, always paying to be invited into a family that didn't want the whole of my life, just the parts that benefited them. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, trying to breathe around the ache. So what do we do? I asked, though my voice already knew the answer. Derek's gaze didn't waver. We stop letting them teach our kids they're worth less. I nodded slowly, feeling something inside me shift, like a lock turning. And I need, I said, voice sharpening, to hear them say it again, not in polite code, not in comfort levels. I need the truth. Derek didn't ask how. He just watched me like he recognized that look, because I'd spent my whole life being soft. And for the first time, I was about to become dangerous. The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I pretended to back down. At 10:07 a.m., my phone lit up with my mother's name. I let it ring twice before answering. Monica, sweetheart, she began, voice syrupy and strained. I've been thinking about yesterday. Maybe we all got off on the wrong foot. We. That word always fascinated me. Somehow, whenever they hurt me, it became a shared misunderstanding. I've been thinking too, I said calmly. I want you to know we love you, and the twins, more than anything. There it was again, the performance of devotion without ownership of wrongdoing. If we said something that seemed hurtful, she continued carefully, that wasn't our intention. Not we were wrong, not we're sorry, just if you felt hurt. I stared at the kitchen counter in my own home, fingers tapping lightly. You're probably right, I said after a beat. I was tired. Maybe I overreacted. The relief in her exhale was immediate. I knew you'd come around. You've always been so level-headed. Level-headed. Manageable. Predictable. Actually, I added, I was thinking of stopping by later, to apologize in person. That would be wonderful, honey, she said quickly. Rebecca will be here too. We can clear the air. Perfect. I drove to their house just before noon and parked down the street instead of in the driveway. The sun was too bright. My pulse was too loud. For a second, I sat in the car, staring at the house I'd helped keep afloat for nearly a decade. Then I got out. I used my spare key, slipping in through the side door as quietly as I could. The house smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. Voices drifted from the kitchen. I didn't announce myself. I stepped into the mudroom and stopped just short of the doorway. Rebecca was speaking first. I can't believe she made such a scene, she said, her tone sharp and incredulous. Acting like we're monsters because we're realistic. My stomach tightened. The twins need to understand how the world works, my father replied evenly. Better they learn now than grow up with unrealistic expectations. I felt something hot rise into my throat. Exactly, my mother agreed. Monica's always been idealistic. She thinks love conquers everything, but that's not how it works with biracial children. There it was, not coded, not softened, just naked. Rebecca gave a short laugh. Sophia's friends were going to be at that barbecue. I can't have them asking awkward questions about why Caleb and Mia look nothing like the rest of us. It puts us in uncomfortable positions, Mom added with a sigh. The neighbors already notice. They ask things. What kind of things? Rebecca asked. The usual, Mom replied lightly. Whether Monica knew what she was getting into dating a black man, whether mixed children struggle with identity issues, behavioral problems, confusion. My fingers dug into the door frame so hard my knuckles ached. They were born into a harder reality, Dad said matter-of-factly. We're doing them a favor by preparing them early. Rebecca's voice lowered. Honestly, Sophia and Liam shouldn't have to lose opportunities because of optics. Optics. As if my children were a public relations issue. And then, casual, careless, devastating. Mom said, Rebecca's children eat first. Monica's wait for scraps. That's just how it has to be with biracial families. The normal-looking kids get priority. Normal-looking. The words scraped something inside me raw. And the sooner Caleb and Mia understand that, Rebecca chimed in, the better off they'll be. They were born to get leftovers socially, within the family, everywhere. They need to learn their place, Dad added. Learn their place. My vision tunneled. I stood there listening to them talk about my babies like defective items that needed to be managed carefully. Like they were embarrassing complications instead of grandchildren. Like Derek was a mistake I'd made. Like I was foolish for loving him. Not love. Not hope, but softness. I stepped into the kitchen. The air shifted instantly. 3 faces turned toward me. For half a second, no one breathed. Then my mother smiled so brightly, it hurt to look at. Monica, you're early. I looked at each of them slowly. Rebecca's mouth was slightly open. Dad's jaw had tightened. Mom was already moving toward me, performing warmth. I was just telling Rebecca how much we enjoyed having the twins yesterday, she said lightly. The audacity was almost impressive. Were you? I asked. Of course, she said quickly. They're such good children. I held her gaze. Actually, I said evenly, I heard your entire conversation. The color drained from Rebecca's face. What conversation? She tried weakly. The one where you said biracial children should expect scraps, I replied. Where you agreed they need to learn their place. Dad shifted. You're taking things out of context. I let up. Mom's voice rose defensively. You misunderstood. No, I said firmly. I didn't. Silence swallowed the room. I walked toward the hall closet and grabbed Mia's forgotten dance bag. I held it in one hand, grounding myself. You know what struck me the most? I continued calmly. It wasn't the racism. They flinched at the word. It was the confidence, I said. The certainty that I'd always come back. That I'd always fund your lifestyle, no matter how you treated my children. Rebecca's lips pressed into a thin line. That's not fair, isn't it? I asked quietly. How much have I given this family in 9 years? Dad looked uncomfortable. We're family. We help each other. My voice didn't waver now. Family doesn't teach 7-year-olds that they deserve less. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Real or strategic, I couldn't tell. We love them, she whispered. Do you? I asked. The room went still again. Because love doesn't sound like what I just heard. I moved toward the door. Monica, wait! Dad called. I turned back once. You have some time to think, I said, about whether you want my children in your lives, or just my money. I left before they could respond. The drive home felt different than the night before. Last night had been pain. Today was clarity. When I walked into the house, Derek looked up immediately. He didn't ask what happened. He read it on my face. They said it, I told him quietly. His jaw tightened. Everything? Worse. I repeated the words. Normal-looking children. Scraps. Learn their place. Derek didn't interrupt. He didn't explode. His anger ran deep and quiet, like a river carving stone. When I finished, he stood and pulled me into his chest. We're done, he said simply. I nodded against him. Yes, I whispered. But done didn't mean dramatic shouting. Done meant strategy. That afternoon, I opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it Documentation, Screenshots of Transfers, Dates, Amounts, Voicemails saved. I made 2 calls before dinner. One to my accountant, one to a family lawyer. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted freedom. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to save the peace. I was preparing to dismantle the system that required me to bleed to belong. They thought I'd come back with my checkbook. They had no idea what I was actually bringing. The accountant called me back 2 days later. I had sent her everything. 9 years of transfers, co-signed loans, shared obligations, the slow drip of money that never quite felt catastrophic in the moment, but added up like sediment at the bottom of a river. When her number flashed on my screen, I stepped outside onto the patio so Derek wouldn't have to watch my face. Monica, she said carefully, the way people do when they're about to tell you something that lands heavy. I've completed the review. I closed my eyes. Okay. There are documented transfers totaling $139,000 over 9 years. Even though I'd seen the numbers stacking, hearing it out loud felt like getting hit in the chest. 139,000, I repeated. That's documented, she continued. It doesn't include informal cash, gifts, or payments that weren't categorized clearly. I leaned against the patio railing, staring at the twins' chalk drawings on the concrete. $13,900. That was both college funds. That was investments Derek and I postponed. That was security we gave away, piece by piece. I need to ask, she said gently. Were these gifts or loans? Some were framed as loans, I admitted. Most were presented as temporary help. Always temporary. And were any repaid? A hollow laugh escaped me. No. She was quiet for a second. Financially speaking, the healthiest move would be immediate cessation of all support. You're subsidizing multiple adults at the expense of your own family's long-term stability. The word subsidizing stung. It sounded clinical. Accurate. And legally? I asked. That depends on the co-signed obligations. You mentioned a mortgage and a vehicle loan? Yes. Then I strongly suggest consulting a lawyer to remove yourself from liability as soon as possible. After I hung up, I stood there a long time. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the illusion. For years, I told myself I was helping. In reality, I was financing comfort for people who saw my children as inconvenient. That afternoon, I sat across from a family lawyer recommended by a colleague. His office smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish. He listened without interrupting as I laid everything out. The transfers, the overheard conversation, the co-signed mortgage, Rebecca's car loan. When I finished, he folded his hands on the desk. Are these court-ordered obligations? He asked. No. Then you are under zero legal obligation to continue financial support. Zero. What about the mortgage? I pressed. I co-signed when they refinanced. You'll need them to qualify independently to remove your name, he explained. Otherwise, the property would need to be sold or refinanced under different terms. And the car loan? You can restrict further credit extensions. Protect yourself from additional exposure. His tone was matter-of-fact. To him, this was paperwork. To me, it was a rupture. Be prepared for backlash, he added. When financial dependency is disrupted, people react strongly. That evening, Derek and I sat at the kitchen table long after the twins went to bed. I met with the lawyer, I told him. He nodded once. And I can walk away, legally, completely. He studied me carefully. Are you ready for what that means? I thought about my mother's tears, my father's wounded pride, Rebecca's temper. I'm ready, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Derek reached for my hand. They're going to panic. I know. They'll blame me, he added quietly. I looked at him sharply. No. They will, he said calmly. It's easier than facing themselves. A familiar ache rose in my chest. I should have protected you sooner, I whispered. Derek squeezed my hand. Protect the kids now. That's what matters. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he asked softly, if strangers treated Caleb and Mia the way your parents did, what would you do? Cut them off immediately. He nodded. There's your answer. The next morning, I began dismantling the structure I'd built for them. First call, the mortgage company. I need to discuss removal from a co-borrower agreement, I said. The representative explained the process. Refinancing required, income verification, 60 to 90 days if they qualified. And if they don't, I asked, then the property would typically need to be sold. Sold. Their house. The one I'd helped preserve through every crisis. I thanked her and hung up. Second call. Rebecca's auto lender. I'd like to add a restriction, I said. No refinancing or credit extensions without my written consent. That can be noted immediately, the agent replied. Third step. I logged into my banking app. One by one, I canceled automatic transfers, mortgage assistance, emergency fund contributions, insurance payments. All of it. Each click felt surreal, like I was pulling life support from something that had been draining me for years. By noon, it was done. The first call came that evening. Dad. Monica, he began carefully, there seems to be some kind of error. The mortgage assistance didn't transfer. There's no error, I replied evenly. Silence. What do you mean? Another silence, thicker this time. You canceled it? Yes. His voice hardened slightly. Why would you do that? Because I'm no longer comfortable funding people who believe my children deserve less than their cousins. A breath on the other end. If this is about that conversation you think you overheard, I don't think, I cut in. I heard. He exhaled sharply. You're being emotional. I'm being a mother. His tone shifted to negotiation. We can talk about this reasonably. What's reasonable about teaching 7-year-olds they need to learn their place? That's not what we meant. Then explain what you meant, I said calmly. He couldn't. Instead, he tried a different angle. We structured our budget around that assistance. That was your choice. You're going to put us in a very difficult position. You already put my children in one. Silence again. I ended the call. 20 minutes later, Rebecca called. What the hell is going on? She demanded. I ended financial support. You can't just do that. I just did. Her voice shifted from rage to panic in seconds. Mom and Dad could lose the house. That's unfortunate. And my car payment is not my responsibility. You're destroying our stability over a misunderstanding. No, I replied. I'm protecting my family from people who think we're socially inconvenient. Her breathing quickened. You're overreacting. Am I? You said my kids were born to get leftovers. Silence. The kind that confirms truth. Here's what's happening, I continued. You have 90 days to restructure your lives. I'm done subsidizing disrespect. You're unbelievable, she snapped. No, I said quietly. I'm finished. After I hung up, I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow, like I'd just severed something living. Derek found me sitting at the table, staring at nothing. You did it, he said gently. I nodded. They'll scream, I murmured. Let them. I looked at him. You don't feel guilty? He shook his head. I feel protective. That night, I lay awake long after everyone else slept. I knew what was coming. Tears. Accusations. Desperation. But underneath the anxiety, there was something else. Relief. For the first time in 9 years, my bank account wasn't bleeding quietly in the background. For the first time, my children weren't going to sit outside while I paid for the privilege of staying invited. The domino had fallen, and I knew, deep in my bones, that they were about to scream. They didn't scream right away. First, they tried confusion, then reason, then guilt. The screaming came later. It started the next morning at 7:42 a.m., just as I was pouring cereal for Caleb and Mia. Mom's name flashed across my screen. I stepped into the laundry room before answering. Monica, she said, already crying, not sniffling, crying. What are you doing to us? I'm protecting my family, I replied evenly. We are your family. I closed my eyes. So are my children. A sharp inhale on her end. We've structured everything around your help. The mortgage, the utilities. We can't just replace that income overnight. You shouldn't have built a life that depended on my wallet. Her voice hardened. You're punishing us. No, I said. I'm refusing to fund people who believe my kids deserve scraps. That's not what we meant, she insisted. Then tell me what you meant, I said quietly. Silence. Then she tried a new tactic. We could lose the house, Monica. I pictured that house. The dining table, the porch. I'm not responsible for maintaining a lifestyle you can't afford. Her crying intensified. After everything we've done for you, I almost laughed. What exactly have you done for me? I asked softly. The line went quiet. I didn't wait for her to recover. The transfers are over. All of them. I hung up before she could recalibrate. The second call came from Rebecca 30 minutes later. You're insane, she snapped. I'm calm, I corrected. My car payment bounced. That sounds like something you should budget for. You co-signed that loan. And I've made every payment for the last 3 years. She sputtered. You can't just walk away. I'm not walking away from my obligation. I'm preventing you from extending it further. There will be no more additional support. You're ruining my credit. No, I said flatly. You are. Her breathing grew erratic. You know what this is? She said bitterly. This is Derek's influence. He's always hated us. My spine went rigid. Leave him out of this, I warned. He's filling your head. He's protecting his children, I cut in sharply. Something you should try. She went silent. Here's what's happening, I continued, voice cool and deliberate. You have 90 days before the mortgage situation forces a decision. Figure it out. You're heartless. No, I said quietly. I'm done. By the end of the week, they moved from anger to strategy. Dad showed up at our house unannounced that Saturday. Derek opened the door first. I watched from the hallway as the two men stood face to face. Dad forced a thin smile. I need to speak with my daughter. She's right here, Derek said evenly, stepping aside but not retreating. I walked forward. Dad's eyes flicked briefly to Derek, then back to me. Monica, he began. We need to discuss this like adults. I agree, I said. Let's discuss why you think my children need to learn their place. His jaw tightened. You're twisting words. I heard every single one. He exhaled sharply. Fine. Maybe we were insensitive. Insensitive, I repeated slowly. Is that what you call it? You're blowing this out of proportion. You let my kids sit outside in October while you ate inside. His gaze dropped for half a second. That wasn't intentional. The conversation I overheard was, he tried again. Destroying our financial stability isn't the solution. I didn't destroy anything, I said calmly. I removed myself. We'll lose the house. Then sell it. His face flushed. You're being vindictive. I'm being clear. He looked at Derek then, almost accusingly. You're comfortable with this? Derek's voice stayed steady. I'm comfortable protecting my children. Dad's eyes shifted back to me. So that's it? After everything? Yes, I said simply. That's it. He left without another word. That night, I lay awake waiting for the next wave. It came 3 weeks later. Rebecca texted first. House is listed. Happy now? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I hope you find something you can afford. She didn't reply. 2 days later, Mom called again, voice small, defeated. We had an offer, she said, below asking. Then take it. We'll have to downsize. Yes. She sounded stunned, like I just suggested something radical. You don't care, she whispered. I care about my children's self-worth. The house sold within 2 months. They moved into a 2-bedroom rental across town. Rebecca picked up a second job at a retail store. She sold the Honda. And that's when the screaming started. Not literal screams, but frantic calls, panic texts, late-night voicemails accusing me of cruelty. You're tearing this family apart. You're humiliating us. Do you know what people are saying? Yes, I did. People were saying they couldn't afford what they once could. They were saying life was harder without my money. They weren't saying they missed Caleb and Mia. Not once. And that was the clearest answer of all. Derek watched quietly as the fallout unfolded. Any regrets? He asked one night as we folded laundry. I thought about my parents packing boxes, about Rebecca juggling shifts, about the loss of the house I'd helped sustain. Then I thought about Caleb's relaxed shoulders at dinner lately, about Mia laughing without scanning rooms for disapproval, about how they no longer asked why they weren't invited. None, I said firmly, because the house wasn't what hurt. The porch had. The crackers had. The words, learn their place, had. And if removing my money was the only language they understood, then that was the language I would speak. But even as their lives shifted and shrank, something unexpected happened. Silence. 6 months of it. No invitations. No holidays. No barbecues. Just occasional bitter texts from Rebecca about overtime shifts and budgeting stress. And in that quiet space, my children flourished. Caleb joined a robotics club and started staying after school twice a week. Mia auditioned for a dance solo and won it. Their world grew, without the weight of subtle rejection dragging behind them. One evening, just as we were finishing dinner, Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's your dad, he said. For me? For me. My stomach tightened. What does he want? He says he wants to meet for coffee, just the two of us. That had never happened before. Not once in 9 years. I looked at Derek carefully. What do you think? He held my gaze. I think, he said slowly, they're learning what life looks like without your money. And And maybe they're starting to understand what they actually lost. I didn't know whether to feel hopeful or cautious. Maybe both. Because desperation can change people. But sometimes, just sometimes, so can consequences. Derek met my father on a Wednesday afternoon at a small coffee shop in Riverside. The kind of neutral territory where hard conversations pretend to be casual. I didn't go. I wanted to. Part of me burned to sit there and watch my father squirm, but this wasn't about me anymore. It was about whether a man who had once said my children needed to learn their place could look their father in the eye and admit he'd been wrong. When Derek walked back through our front door 2 hours later, I knew immediately this hadn't been a shouting match. He looked unsettled, not angry, not satisfied, just thoughtful. I set the dish towel down slowly. How did it go? He exhaled and ran a hand over his jaw. He apologized. My heart stuttered. For what? For treating me like I didn't belong. Derek's voice stayed even, but there was something under it, old hurt resurfacing. For making assumptions about our marriage, about our kids. I blinked. He said that? He did. I stepped closer. Was it one of those, "I'm sorry you felt that way" apologies? Derek shook his head. No, it was specific. He moved to the couch and sat, elbows on his knees. He said he was ashamed, Derek continued quietly. He said losing the house forced him to look at everything differently. There it was. The house. They had, in fact, lost it. The offer they'd taken hadn't covered everything. After fees and penalties, they'd walked away with far less than they expected. Renting had been their only option. They're in a 2-bedroom apartment now, Derek said, smaller than ours. I sat beside him slowly. And Rebecca? Working 2 jobs, sold the car. She's taking the bus. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I'd imagined this fallout, but hearing it made it real. Did he mention money? I asked carefully. Derek met my eyes. Not once. That surprised me more than anything. What did he say about the twins? Derek's expression softened slightly. He asked about Caleb's robotics project. Specifically, he knew the competition date. I felt something flicker in my chest. Confusion? Hope? He asked about Mia's solo, Derek continued. Wanted to know the name of the song. I swallowed. He said he's been going to counseling with your mom, Derek added. Unconscious bias training. They're trying to understand how they let their fear dictate how they treated our kids. My throat tightened. Fear. That was the first time anyone in my family had named it honestly. Not realism, not tradition. Fear. Of what? That you were done. For good. I leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. They were terrified of losing comfort, I muttered. Derek shook his head gently. No. I think he realized they'd lost something much bigger. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Mom. I stared at it for a long second before answering. Hello. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Monica, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. Go ahead, I said evenly. We're in counseling. Derek's eyes flicked to mine. For what? I asked. For everything, her voice trembled. For the things we said, for the way we behaved, for how we let our prejudice hide behind words like realistic. I didn't respond. I don't expect forgiveness, she continued, but I need you to know we were wrong. The word landed heavily. Wrong. Not misunderstood. Not misquoted. Wrong. We were afraid, she admitted. Afraid of what neighbors would think. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of losing social standing. And so you chose that over your grandchildren, I said quietly. Yes. Silence stretched between us. I wasn't sure what I'd expected. Excuses, maybe. Minimizing. Instead, I heard something I'd never heard before from her. Shame. We failed them, she whispered. And we failed you. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. The money isn't coming back, I said firmly. I know. Ever. I understand. Do you? I pressed. Because every conversation before this eventually turned into a request. It won't, she said quickly. We're learning to live within what we actually earn. I let that sit. If you want a relationship with Caleb and Mia, I said slowly, it has to be because you value them, not because you miss what I provided. I want a relationship because I love them, she said. Love isn't words, I replied. It's behavior. I know. Her voice cracked again. Can we start small, she asked. Dinner somewhere neutral. Everyone pays their own way. No expectations. Derek's hand found mine. I'll think about it, I said. After we hung up, I sat in silence. What are you feeling? Derek asked softly. I searched for the right word. Tired, I admitted, but maybe hopeful. Hopeful is okay, he said gently. Just don't drop your boundaries. I won't. That night, I watched my children sleep. Caleb's arm was thrown across his pillow. Mia's curls spilled across her face. They looked peaceful, unburdened. And I realized something quietly profound. The screaming had stopped, not because they'd won, but because they'd finally understood they couldn't. Consequences had done what arguments never could. They'd forced reflection. 3 weeks later, we met at a casual restaurant in Moreno Valley. Neutral ground, no one hosting. No one footing the bill. When my parents walked in, they looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but humbled. Mom hugged the twins carefully, like she was asking permission without words. Dad crouched down to Caleb's level. I heard your team modified the gripper mechanism, he said, stumbling slightly over the technical term. Caleb's eyes widened. How did you know that? Dad glanced at me briefly. Your mom showed me the pictures online. Mia shyly showed Grandma a video of her rehearsal. Mom watched it twice, not glancing at her phone, not distracted. Listening. It wasn't perfect. I caught Mom starting to say, some events are just, before she stopped herself. For everyone, she corrected awkwardly. All of you. It was clumsy, but it was different. After dinner, as we walked toward our cars, Mom touched my arm gently. Losing your support, she said quietly, was the best thing that could have happened to us. I raised an eyebrow. It forced us to confront who we'd become, she continued. We were prioritizing comfort over character. I searched her face for manipulation. I didn't find it. Just regret. Later that night, as we drove home, Mia spoke softly from the back seat. Mama, are Grandma and Grandpa different now? I glanced at Derek before answering. What do you think? I asked her. I think they're trying, she said thoughtfully. Caleb nodded. Grandpa actually asked questions, real ones. Derek squeezed my hand gently. Any regrets? He murmured. I thought about the house they lost, the months of silence, the hard edge I'd had to grow. Then I looked in the rearview mirror at my children. Confident, valued, safe. Not one, I said. Because sometimes love has to learn the hard way. And sometimes the only way people understand your worth is when they lose access to it. For a while, it almost felt normal. Not the old normal, the one where I paid for everything and pretended not to notice, but something cautious and fragile, like glass glued back together. Usable, but only if handled carefully. We had 2 more dinners after that first one. Public places, separate checks, no talk of money. My parents asked about the twins' school projects. They remembered details. They didn't flinch when strangers glanced between Derek and me and then at our children. They didn't make excuses about comfort levels. I watched them the entire time, every sentence, every reaction. Looking for cracks, Rebecca came quieter than before, less sharp. Working 2 jobs had stripped something out of her, entitlement maybe. She talked about budgeting apps and bus schedules instead of spa days and neighborhood gossip. But I didn't trust peace that came too easily. And I was right. It happened 3 weeks later. Mom called on a Sunday afternoon, her voice carefully composed. Monica, we've been thinking. That phrase had once meant financial disaster disguised as humility. I didn't interrupt. What if we started regular Sunday dinners again? She continued. All the grandchildren together. Same activities, same meals, equal treatment, equal treatment. The words were chosen deliberately. That sounds nice, I said neutrally. And, she added, just a little too quickly, while we're rebuilding trust, maybe you could help just with essentials, just the mortgage portion. Well, rent now, just temporarily. There it was. The performance. The negotiation. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. Mom, I said calmly, do you miss Caleb and Mia? Of course I do. Or do you miss financial stability? Silence. A long one. That's unfair, she whispered. Is it? We're struggling. You were struggling when you owned a house you couldn't afford without my income. That's not how we saw it. I know, I replied softly. That's the problem. She shifted tactics. People make mistakes, Monica. We're trying. Trying doesn't come with invoices. Another silence. You're being cold, she said finally. No, I said. I'm being consistent. Her voice cracked slightly. We thought if you saw we were making an effort. I see the effort, I interrupted gently, but the money is not part of this conversation. Ever again. A sharp inhale. Not even a little help, she pressed. No. The word felt clean in my mouth. Final. It wasn't rage I felt. It was disappointment. They were changing, but they were still hoping for partial restoration of the old arrangement. Old habits die slow. Derek found me at the kitchen table. That was about money, wasn't it? He asked. I nodded. He didn't look surprised. They're scared, he said quietly. I know. And fear doesn't get rewarded. 6 months passed. 6 months of cautious contact. No financial requests after that call, but no invitations to holidays either. Rebecca sent the occasional text complaining about exhaustion or how unfair everything felt. I stopped responding to those. Instead, I poured that energy into my own house. We opened college accounts for Caleb and Mia with the money we weren't sending out anymore. Derek and I took the twins to Hawaii over spring break. I watched them run along the shoreline, sun in their curls, laughter unburdened. And I realized something quietly devastating. My children were lighter. Not because their grandparents were different, but because they weren't constantly trying to earn belonging. One evening, as we were finishing dinner, Caleb looked up suddenly. Mama? Yes, baby? Did Grandma and Grandpa lose their house because of us? The question sliced through me. No, I said firmly. They lost it because they built a life they couldn't afford. He studied my face. You didn't make them homeless? No. Mia tilted her head. Are they mad at us? I reached across the table and took both their hands. None of this is your fault, I said carefully. Adults are responsible for their own choices. They nodded slowly. Children are incredibly perceptive. They'd felt the shift. They'd noticed the quiet. But they weren't carrying shame, and that mattered more than any reconciliation. A few weeks later, Derek's phone buzzed again. Your dad wants to meet. Just you. Coffee. Again. This time, I didn't feel fear. I felt curiosity. What do you think now? I asked Derek. He considered it. I think they're learning that effort doesn't automatically restore access. And I think your father is trying to prove something. 2 days later, Derek returned from that second coffee meeting with a different expression than before. He didn't ask for money, Derek said before I even asked. What did he ask for? He asked if he could come to Mia's dance recital. My breath caught. Publicly? Yes. That's new. He said he wants to show up. Fully. I didn't respond immediately. Showing up publicly meant something. It meant standing in a room full of strangers and choosing our family without qualification. No hiding. No distancing language. Just presence. What do you think? Derek asked. I think, I said slowly, we let them prove it. The recital was 3 weeks later. I didn't tell my parents where to sit. I didn't coordinate. I didn't offer backstage access. They would either show up or they wouldn't. The night of the recital, the auditorium buzzed with energy. Parents adjusting cameras, kids in glitter and tights. Mia's name was third in the program. I felt my heart pounding as I scanned the crowd. And then I saw them. Front row. Mom clutching a bouquet, Dad holding the program upside down until a volunteer corrected him. They stood when Mia's group walked on stage. They clapped too loud. They cheered. No hesitation. No discomfort. After the performance, Mom rushed forward, tears streaming. "You were incredible," she told Mia, kneeling to hug her tightly. Dad asked about the choreography, specific details, not small talk, real interest. I watched carefully. Not for perfection, for sincerity. Later, in the car, Mia beamed. "Grandpa yelled my name," she giggled. Caleb nodded approvingly. They stayed the whole time. Derek squeezed my hand gently. "Progress," he murmured. "Yes," I agreed quietly. "Progress, but not forgiveness. Not yet. That would take more than flowers and applause. It would take consistency. And consistency was the one thing they had never given before. If you had told me a year ago that my father would sit in the front row of Mia's dance recital and cheer louder than anyone else in the room, I would have smiled politely and changed the subject. Not because I didn't want it to be true, but because I didn't believe he was capable of choosing discomfort over pride. I was wrong. 2 weeks after the recital, Caleb had his regional robotics competition, an all-day event in a noisy high school gym in San Bernardino. Folding chairs, concession stands, parents pacing like anxious investors, watching tiny machines determine their child's destiny. I didn't remind my parents. I didn't send the address twice. I didn't follow up. If they came, it would be because they wanted to. Mom wore sneakers instead of heels. Dad carried a thermos like he was preparing for battle. They looked determined. Caleb spotted them before I could say anything. "Grandpa," he called out, surprised but smiling. Dad waved awkwardly and quickened his step. "You made it," Caleb said, as if he hadn't quite expected it. "Wouldn't miss it," Dad replied, and for once, it didn't sound like a script. They stayed. All day, they asked questions about point systems. They listened as Caleb explained torque ratios and grip calibration like he was presenting a thesis. Dad even took notes, actual notes. At one point, I caught him watching Caleb. Not the robot, not the scoreboard, but Caleb himself. Proud. Unfiltered. That look alone almost undid me. During a break between rounds, Mom sat beside me on the bleachers. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For what?" I asked, not looking at her yet. "For letting fear decide who we valued." I turned slowly. "We didn't think we were being cruel," she continued. "We told ourselves we were being realistic, protective, socially aware. But you weren't protecting them," I said softly. "You were protecting yourselves." She nodded, tears pooling. "Yes." That admission meant more than any bouquet. "I need you to understand something," I added. "The money is never part of this again." "I know," she said immediately, "and I don't want it to be." I studied her face for calculation. I didn't find it. Instead, I saw exhaustion, the kind that comes when comfort has been stripped away and all that's left is accountability. "They're in counseling," Derek had told me weeks earlier. "Your dad mentioned it. Now Mom confirmed it." "We're learning about bias," she said quietly, "about how we hid prejudice behind tradition." "That must be uncomfortable," I replied. "It is," she admitted, "but not as uncomfortable as realizing we almost lost our grandchildren." That word, lost, echoed, because they had, for a while, not physically, but emotionally, and that's harder to repair. When Caleb's team made it to the semifinals, Dad stood up so fast he nearly knocked over the thermos. "That's my grandson," he shouted. Not Monica's son, not the biracial kid, not a qualifier in sight, just pride. Uncomplicated. After the competition, as we walked to our cars, Dad cleared his throat. "I was wrong," he said simply. I waited. I let other people's opinions matter more than my own blood. "And," I prompted gently, "and I hurt them," he finished. That was the first time he'd said it plainly. No minimizing, no deflection, just truth. That night, back at home, the twins talked over each other in excitement. Grandpa knew what torque meant. Grandma said she wants to learn coding. Derek laughed softly and glanced at me. "They're noticing," he murmured. "Yes," I said quietly. "They are." And that mattered more than anything my parents said to me. 3 months later, something shifted fully. My parents had downsized again, moved to an even smaller apartment they could comfortably afford without scrambling. Rebecca found a better paying job at a medical office. No bus now. A used car she bought herself. No requests for help, not even subtle ones. One Sunday afternoon, Mom called. "We'd like to come to your house," she said hesitantly, "if that's okay." It had been nearly a year since that night on the porch. Nearly a year since I'd heard them say my children should wait for scraps. I considered the weight of that. "Okay," I said finally. "But everyone brings something." A small pause. "Of course," she replied quickly. They showed up carrying dishes. Dad brought a salad. Mom made a casserole. Rebecca came with dessert and an unfamiliar humility. As we sat around our own dining table, I watched carefully. Caleb talked robotics. Mia described her next solo. Sophia and Liam chimed in. No one was sent outside. No one was told to lower their voice. No one was treated as different. It wasn't perfect. Healing rarely is. But it was equal, and equal was all I'd ever demanded. After dinner, Mia leaned against me. "Mama," she whispered, "I'm glad we taught them how to love us right." I swallowed hard. Me too, because that was the truth of it. I had forced it to confront itself. And in doing so, I'd learned something far more important than how much money I'd given away. I learned that love without dignity is not love. That sometimes the only way people understand your value is when you remove access to it. 1 year fully, without conditions, without qualifiers. And the woman who once tolerated scraps to keep the peace, she was gone. In her place stood a mother who knew that protecting her children wasn't dramatic. And sometimes, when you stop funding dysfunction, you give not because you begged, but because you refused to accept less. The first real holiday back together felt like walking into a room that still remembered the fight. It was Thanksgiving. For years, I had hosted or paid for most of it. Groceries, wine, decorations, even the turkey that somehow never quite fit into my parents' oven, but always fit into my credit card. This time, it was different. It was at my house, and everyone brought something. No one asked me what I was covering. No one hinted about tight budgets. They showed up carrying foil trays and nervous energy. I watched everything. The way my mother stepped into my kitchen and paused, as if unsure where she stood now. The way my father lingered near Derek instead of drifting toward the television. The way Rebecca kept glancing at me like she was waiting for a verdict. But the most important thing, the twins didn't look tense. They didn't hover near me. They didn't scan the room for exclusion. They just existed. Caleb set up a small demo of his latest robotics build on the dining room sideboard. Mia showed Sophia a new dance routine in the hallway, both girls laughing. At one point, Mom walked over to Caleb and asked, "Can you explain again how the motor adjusts when it senses resistance?" He blinked at her. "You want to hear that part?" "Yes," she said. "I want to understand what you love." I caught Derek watching from across the room. His expression was soft, but cautious. Trust wasn't automatic. It had to be earned in repetition. Dinner felt almost surreal. Everyone sat at the same table. No porch. No separation. No comfort levels. When I carried the turkey out, Dad stood to help without being asked. When Mia asked for more mashed potatoes, Rebecca passed them to her before serving her own kids. Small gestures. But they weren't small to me. They were corrections. Midway through dinner, there was a moment, a subtle one, where everything could have slipped. Sophia mentioned an upcoming neighborhood Christmas event. I felt the air tighten. Last year, that exact type of event had been labeled not for everyone. Mom cleared her throat. "Well," she began. My heart braced. "It's open to the entire community," she finished carefully. "And if you'd like to go, Caleb and Mia, we can all attend together." Caleb looked at me first. Not for permission, for confirmation. I nodded. "If we go," I said calmly, "we go as one family." Dad met my eyes. "As one," he agreed. There was no hesitation, and that mattered more than the invitation itself. After dinner, as dishes clinked in the sink and the kids sprawled across the living room floor, Rebecca approached me quietly. "I owe you something," she said. I dried my hands slowly. "What?" "An apology." I raised an eyebrow slightly. "For saying those things," she continued. "About optics, about leftovers." The words sounded ugly coming out of her mouth now. I was jealous, she admitted, surprising me. You had stability, a good career, a solid relationship, and I let my insecurity twist into resentment. I didn't respond immediately. I took it out on your kids, she said, and that was unforgivable. I studied her carefully. This wasn't desperation. It wasn't panic. It sounded reflective. I'm not promising we're close again, I said finally. Trust doesn't regenerate overnight. I know, she nodded, but I'm not asking for money anymore. There it was. The acknowledgement. Clear. Direct. I don't need it, she added quietly, and I don't want that dynamic back. For the first time in years, I believed her. Later that evening, after everyone left and the house fell quiet, Derek and I sat on the couch. Well, he asked gently. I leaned back against him, exhaling slowly. They're different, I admitted. Different enough? Maybe. He kissed the top of my head. Proud of you, he said. For what? For holding the line. The truth was, I hadn't known if holding the line would break everything permanently. There were nights I'd lain awake wondering if I'd overcorrected, if I'd been too harsh, if losing the house had been too steep a price. But watching my children tonight, laughing, unguarded, fully included, I understood something with painful clarity. The house was never the real loss. The loss would have been if Caleb and Mia grew up believing they were worthless, that their place was at the edge of the table, that love had tears. Instead, they learned something else. That dignity is non-negotiable, that even grandparents can be wrong and can choose to grow. A few weeks later, the neighborhood Christmas event happened. All of us. No awkward distance. No careful positioning. When someone asked how the twins were related, Dad answered easily. These are my grandchildren, he said proudly. Not a qualifier in sight. I watched that moment closely. He didn't glance around. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't soften the truth. He stood in it. And I realized then they hadn't just adjusted their behavior because they were afraid. They had shifted because they were forced to confront themselves, confront what kind of people they wanted to be. And sometimes that confrontation only happens when comfort is removed. 1 year ago, my children sat outside eating crackers while their cousins had pot roast. Tonight they stood in a crowd, lights glowing around them, surrounded by family that no longer pretended they were inconvenient. Mia tugged my sleeve. Mama? Yes? Are we equal now? The question held no bitterness, just curiosity. I knelt down so I could look her in the eye. You were always equal, I said softly. Now everyone else knows it. She smiled, and that smile was worth more than every dollar I'd ever transferred. 1 year after that night on the porch, I stood in my kitchen and watched something I never thought I'd see. My father was teaching Caleb how to slice tomatoes, carefully, patiently. Not correcting him harshly, not dismissing him. Just standing beside him like a grandfather who had nothing to prove and everything to give. Mia was at the dining table with my mother, flipping through a dance costume catalog. They were debating glitter levels like it was a national emergency. Rebecca sat on the couch with Derek, laughing at something on his phone. The sound was genuine, not forced, not strained. The house smelled like roasted garlic and rosemary. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was monitoring the room. I was just in it. Earlier that day, as I'd been setting the table, a memory had flashed through my mind uninvited. The porch. The crackers. The words. Rebecca's children eat first. Monica's wait for scraps. I'd expected that memory to sting forever, but it didn't. It felt distant now, like a scar that no longer hurt when touched. Because the truth was, my children no longer sat outside. Not physically, not emotionally. They belonged at every table, and everyone in this room knew it. Dinner was loud, messy, equal. No one served one child first. No one excluded. When I placed the casserole in the center of the table, I caught my mother watching me. There was something in her expression I hadn't seen before. Respect, not the kind that comes from financial leverage, the kind that comes from boundaries. After dessert, when the kids scattered to the backyard, Dad cleared his throat. I want to say something, he said. The table went quiet. He looked directly at Caleb and Mia first. I was wrong last year, he said simply, about a lot of things. Caleb tilted his head slightly. Mia watched him closely. I let other people's opinions make me weak, Dad continued. And I treated you like you were something to manage instead of something to celebrate. The room felt very still. I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed. It was quiet and clear. Caleb nodded slowly. Okay, he said. And just like that, children did what adults struggle to do. They accepted it. Later, after everyone left and the house fell quiet, Derek and I sat at the kitchen table with 2 glasses of wine. Well, he said softly, we survived. I laughed quietly. More than that, I replied. He leaned back in his chair. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd kept paying? He asked. I didn't need time to answer. Yes. Caleb would have learned to shrink. Mia would have learned to smile through discomfort. Derek would have kept absorbing insults quietly to protect me. And I would have kept confusing peace with love. They would have stayed comfortable, I said slowly. And my kids would have learned to accept less. Derek reached for my hand. You changed the trajectory. I looked toward the hallway where our children slept. No, I said softly. I corrected it. In the months that followed, something steady settled into our lives. My parents never asked for money again. Not when rent went up, not when medical bills appeared, not even when Rebecca's hours were temporarily cut. They adjusted. They budgeted. They downsized expectations. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, the dynamic shifted completely. They didn't visit because they needed something. They visited because they wanted to. Dad started coming by on Saturdays to help Caleb build small projects in the garage. Mom attended Mia's rehearsals without posting about it online, without making it about herself. Rebecca apologized again, once privately, once publicly, when she corrected someone at work who made a casual comment about mixed families. Growth. Real growth. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't cinematic. But it was consistent. And consistency is what rebuilds trust. One evening, as I tucked Mia into bed, she wrapped her arms around my neck. Mama? Yes, sweetheart? Are we going to have to teach anyone else how to love us right? The question caught me off guard. Maybe, I said gently. But now you know how. She smiled sleepily. Good. After I turned off her light, I stood in the hallway for a moment, thinking about the woman I had been a year ago, the one who thought being generous would earn acceptance, the one who mistook tolerance for love, the one who believed keeping the peace mattered more than drawing the line. She wasn't weak. She was hopeful. But hope without boundaries is just self-sacrifice, and my children deserved more than that. The next Sunday, we hosted another dinner. Everyone brought something again. No one assumed. No one expected. Caleb and Mia set the table themselves. As we all sat down, Derek squeezed my knee under the table. Look, he whispered. I did. 4 adults, 4 children, 1 table. No hierarchy. No scraps. Just family. Mia leaned against me, her voice soft and certain. I'm glad we taught them, she murmured. Taught them what? I asked. How to love us right. I kissed the top of her head. Me too. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to bankroll behavior that harms the people you care about most. Sometimes protection looks like withdrawal. Sometimes growth requires loss. And sometimes, when you stop funding dysfunction, you don't lose your family. You give them the chance to become one.